As the day's successes faded from her mind, Janet stood in the doorway of her bedroom, a sense of dread washing over her. The sight of her dresser drawer, carelessly left ajar, sent a shiver down her spine. Inside, the intimate photos she had taken, a private expression of love and desire for her husband, were now disturbed, a clear sign of intrusion. These photos were more than just images. They were a narrative of her trust and vulnerability, a visual language meant only for the man she loved. They were sensual and intimate, capturing the essence of her confidence and the strength of her marital bond. The realization that Tyler had seen them shook her to the core. His presence in the house during his summer break had become familiar, his respect for her a cornerstone of their relationship. Yet here she was, faced with the aftermath of his breach of her privacy. Her mind raced. How could she have been so careless? What must he think of her now? The images, so personal and explicit, were never meant for anyone else's eyes, least of all her stepson's. She could almost see Tyler's shock as he discovered the photos, his curiosity at war with the respect he had always shown her. His perception of her would be forever altered, and the dynamic between them had shifted into uncharted territory. The air in the room seemed to grow dense as she considered the implications of this discovery. Tyler was smart and perceptive. He would recognize the power he now wielded over her, the ability to destroy her peace of mind with a single impulsive act. Janet's heart raced with a mix of fear and resolve. She needed to address this, to confront the reality of the situation and the vulnerability she felt. She had to speak with Tyler, to appeal to the part of him that still held her in high esteem. The confrontation would be difficult, but it was necessary to regain her footing and to protect her family from potential scandal. With a deep breath to steady her nerves, she stepped away from the dresser, the drawer now closed, concealing the evidence of her exposed secret. She left her bedroom, each step a testament to her determination. The evening air, tinged with the savory aroma of dinner, wrapped around Janet as she entered the kitchen. The stove's gentle hum and the occasional clatter of a lid were the only sounds that broke the silence, a silence that seemed to thicken with each step she took. At the island, Tyler was seated, a picture of tranquility that didn't quite convince. His eyes, usually so open and expressive, now held a guarded quality that set her on edge. "I found something interesting in your room," Tyler began, his words slicing through the quiet. His tone was deceptively light, but there was an edge to it that made Janet's heart skip a beat. The photos, those private tokens of affection, lay spread out between them, a gauntlet thrown down in challenge. "One click and they're everywhere," he continued, the malice in his voice as clear as the polished surface of the granite countertop. The threat was implicit, a digital sword of Damocles hanging over her head. Janet's world seemed to tilt on its axis. The walls of her beautiful home closed in around her, the comforting familiarity of the space now a gilded cage. Her breath caught in her chest, a physical ache that mirrored the turmoil in her mind. She felt exposed, violated, and more than a little afraid of what might come next. Yet, she refused to let him see her panic. With a composure born of years in a cutthroat industry, she met his gaze and asked the question that was burning in her throat. "What do you want, Tyler?" Her voice was a steady vessel on a storm-tossed sea, betraying none of the fear that roiled beneath the surface. Tyler leaned back in his chair, the smirk on his lips a twisted version of the smile she used to receive from him. There was a newfound maturity in the set of his jaw, a hardness in his eyes that spoke of hidden depths and unspoken intentions. "We'll start with something simple," he said, his words chosen with the precision of a seasoned negotiator. The ambiguity of his response hung in the air, a shroud of uncertainty that enveloped the room. The night, once a promise of rest and respite, now stretched out before her, fraught with unknown dangers and the promise of difficult days ahead. Janet's mind raced as she considered her next move. Tyler had always been a clever boy, but this was a game of a different nature. It was a power play, one that could potentially destroy everything she held dear, her marriage, her reputation, her sense of self. The stakes were high, and the rules were being written on the fly. She knew she had to tread carefully to navigate this minefield with an expert touch. One wrong step could be catastrophic, but doing nothing was not an option. She needed to regain the upper hand, to shift the balance of power back in her favor. As the minutes ticked by, each second heavy with tension, Janet formulated a plan. She would play along for now, giving Tyler just enough rope to hang himself with. She would be the attentive stepmother he seemed to crave, all while looking for a way out of this nightmare. With a nod of acknowledgement, she rose from her seat, the motion deliberate and controlled. "I think it's time we both got some rest," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that brooked no argument. "We can discuss this further in the morning, when we're both thinking more clearly." Tyler watched her, his expression inscrutable, as she turned to leave the kitchen. She could feel his eyes on her, a physical presence that clung to her like a shadow. But she didn't falter, not even as she heard him murmur his assent, the sound echoing in the silence long after she had left the room. The night ahead promised to be a long one, filled with sleepless hours and a ceaseless parade of worst-case scenarios. But Janet was a fighter, a survivor. She would not go down without a fight, and she would do everything in her power to protect her family from the storm that was brewing on the horizon. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the opulent surfaces of Janet's home. Yesterday's confrontation still lingered in the air, a silent specter that trailed her every move. Yet she refused to let fear dictate her actions. With a determined breath, she prepared herself for the day ahead, donning the skimpiest bikini in her collection as per Tyler's instructions. The thin strips of fabric barely covered her, the boldness of her attire a stark departure from her usual conservative style. As she moved through the house, the familiar tasks of straightening cushions and watering plants took on a surreal quality. The bikini, so revealing and uncharacteristic, clung to her like a second skin, its flimsy material a constant reminder of her precarious situation. Every step she took, every bend and reach, seemed to amplify her awareness of her own body. A body that was now on display for Tyler's watchful eyes. His gaze was like a physical touch, tracing the contours of her figure with an intensity that bordered on invasive. She could feel the weight of his attention, a palpable presence that seemed to follow her from room to room. The air around her buzzed with a potent mix of danger and desire, a heady concoction that left her both on edge and acutely aware of her own femininity. At first, his comments were almost playful, a teasing lilt to his voice that hinted at the underlying tension. "You look like you could use some sun," he'd say, or, "That suit really suits you," accompanied by a knowing look that made her cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and a strange, unwelcome thrill. His casual touches, whether deliberate or the result of close proximity, sent jolts of electricity through her. The brush of his hand against her hip as he passed by, the way his fingers seemed to linger on the small of her back as he steadied her. Each point of contact was a spark that threatened to ignite the powder keg of their relationship. To her dismay, Janet found herself grappling with a confusing whirlwind of emotions. Each accidental touch, each lingering look, fanned the flames of a forbidden attraction that she had never asked for, nor wanted. It was a betrayal of her values, a slippery slope that led to a place she could not afford to go. And yet, there was an undeniable part of her that thrilled at the danger, that reveled in the knowledge that she still possessed the power to captivate a young man's attention. The day wore on, the oppressive silence of the house broken only by the mundane sounds of their shared existence. Janet found herself trapped in a bizarre ballet, a dance of power and provocation that left her feeling both empowered and deeply ashamed. As the afternoon sun reached its zenith, Janet poured Tyler a cold drink, her hands shaking ever so slightly as she handed him the glass. Their fingers touched, a fleeting contact that sent a ripple of awareness through her. She withdrew quickly, a nervous smile playing on her lips as she turned to leave. But as she moved away, she couldn't help but glance back at him, her curiosity getting the better of her. The sight that met her eyes was both shocking and oddly mesmerizing. There he was, her stepson, lounging on the couch with a casual abandon that was at odds with the tension that crackled in the air. Beneath the blanket draped over his lap, his hand moved in a rhythmic motion, his eyes locked onto her retreating form with an intensity that left little to the imagination. A flood of heat coursed through her veins, a combination of anger, embarrassment, and an illicit excitement that she refused to acknowledge. She tore her gaze away from the spectacle, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm in her chest as she fled the room, the walls closing in around her. In the sanctuary of her bedroom, Janet sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling from the day's events. She could still feel the ghost of his touch, the phantom weight of his gaze. The lines between right and wrong had become irrevocably blurred, and she found herself adrift in a sea of uncertainty and mounting desire. The bikini, once just a piece of clothing, now felt like a symbol of her surrender, a tangible representation of her willingness to play this dangerous game. And as she lay back against the pillows, the cool fabric a stark contrast to the heat that flushed her skin, Janet knew that she was walking a tightrope between control and chaos, with the potential to fall into the abyss at any moment. The day had been a test of her resolve, a gauntlet thrown down by fate itself. And as the evening shadows crept across the room, Janet faced the undeniable truth. She was in way over her head, with no clear path to safety. But for now, she would hold her ground, fortified by the knowledge that she was not just a player in this high-stakes game. She was a force to be reckoned with. The morning dawned with a sense of trepidation that clung to Janet like a second skin. The previous day's events had left her feeling raw and exposed, yet there was an undeniable pulse of energy that thrummed beneath her skin, a dangerous mix of fear and anticipation. As she prepared for the day, her hands shook slightly as she reached for the shortest skirt in her wardrobe, a garment that had always been more daring than her usual attire. Today, it felt like a banner of submission, a tangible symbol of Tyler's control over her. She could hear his voice in her head, the smug challenge in his words as he'd instructed her to wear it with nothing underneath. The thought of moving about the house, bare beneath the flimsy fabric, sent a shiver down her spine. It was a bold move on his part, one that pushed the boundaries of their already strained relationship to the brink. As she descended the stairs and began her daily routine, Janet was acutely aware of the vulnerability of her position. Each step she took, each bend to dust a low shelf or reach for a high one, threatened to reveal more than she was prepared to show. The skirt, several inches shorter than anything she would have chosen for herself, rode up with every movement, and she felt the cool air of the house whisper against her skin, a reminder of her enforced state of undress. Tyler's eyes seemed to be everywhere at once, tracking her movements with a predatory focus that made her skin prickle with heat. She could feel his gaze like a physical caress, a violation that left her feeling both objectified and strangely powerful. There was something primal in the way he looked at her, a raw hunger that spoke to the most basic of human instincts. Despite her discomfort, Janet couldn't ignore the warmth that pooled low in her belly each time their eyes met. It was a betrayal of her principles, a rebellion of her body against the dictates of her mind. With each glance, each smirk, each lingering look, the air between them seemed to crackle with electricity, charging the atmosphere with an energy that was both thrilling and terrifying. The hours ticked by, each minute stretching into an eternity of silent power plays and unspoken challenges. The house, once a sanctuary of domestic bliss, now felt like a battleground, each room a potential theater for their escalating war of wills. By the time the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the polished floors, the tension in the house had reached a fever pitch. Janet found herself standing before Tyler, the hem of her skirt teasingly high on her thighs, the thin fabric of the garment doing nothing to conceal her from his penetrating gaze. Something within her, some last thread of restraint, finally snapped. In that moment, she was no longer just his stepmother. She was a woman driven by a potent mix of defiance and desire. With a boldness that surprised even herself, she closed the distance between them, her eyes locked onto his in a silent dare. Without a word, she leaned in, her lips finding his in a kiss that was as much a challenge as it was a capitulation. The contact, brief but intense, was a question hanging in the air between them, a question that neither of them was fully prepared to answer. The kiss was a paradox, a tender violation that blurred the lines between right and wrong. It was an acknowledgement of the twisted dynamic that had taken root in their relationship, a dynamic that was both exhilarating and deeply, profoundly wrong. As she pulled away, Janet's heart raced with the enormity of what she had done. She searched Tyler's eyes for a reaction, but his face was a mask of confusion and desire that mirrored her own tumultuous emotions. For a moment they stood there in silence, the weight of their shared transgression hanging heavy between them. The house, once filled with the sounds of their silent battle, was now eerily quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "What are we doing?" Janet finally whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the room. The question hung in the air, a lifeline thrown out into the churning sea of their emotions. Tyler's response was a low murmur, his words a mere breath against her lips. "Something we both want," he said, the smoldering look in his eyes belying the casual dismissal of the gravity of their situation. The truth of his statement hit Janet like a physical blow. They were both complicit in this dangerous dance, both willing participants in a game that could have devastating consequences. And yet, in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. All that existed was the two of them, caught in a web of desire that threatened to consume them both. As the evening shadows lengthened and the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, Janet made her way to her bedroom, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The day had been a roller coaster of uncertainty and undeniable attraction, a test of her resolve that had left her questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. The skirt, once a symbol of her submission to Tyler's demands, now felt like a banner of her own sexual power, a reminder that she was still very much in control of her own destiny. And as she prepared for another restless night, Janet knew that the days ahead would be fraught with challenges and temptations that would test the very limits of her strength and her will. But for now, she would allow herself this one small victory, this moment of connection with the young man who had turned her world upside down. Tomorrow, she would face the consequences of her actions, but tonight, she would revel in the knowledge that she had taken back a measure of control, even if it meant crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. As the night settled in, a soft knock on her bedroom door pulled Janet from her thoughts. She turned to find Tyler standing in the doorway, the dim light casting a shadow across his features. "I need you to go with me in the jacuzzi," he said, his voice steady despite the tension that crackled in the air. Janet's heart skipped a beat, the weight of his invitation hanging heavy between them. She knew that accompanying him to the jacuzzi at this late hour was a bold move, one that could potentially push them further down a path with no clear return. Yet, she found herself nodding, a silent agreement that set her pulse racing with anticipation. Slipping into the chosen bikini, Janet took a moment to appraise her reflection in the mirror. The sapphire blue fabric was a daring choice, its intricate gold accents shimmering against her skin. The top, a testament to impeccable design, offered a tantalizing glimpse of cleavage, while the bottoms, cut in a cheeky style, clung to her hips and accentuated the curves of her derriere. Her long auburn hair tumbled over her shoulders in loose, tousled waves, a striking contrast to the sleek lines of her swimwear. With a deep breath to steady her nerves, Janet made her way downstairs, each step a conscious decision to embrace the evening's unspoken promises. The backyard was a sanctuary of tranquility, the jacuzzi's underwater lights casting a soft, ethereal glow over the scene. Steam rose from the churning water, a beckoning whisper in the cool night air. Tyler was already seated in the jacuzzi, his eyes hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses despite the evening's dimness. As Janet approached, his gaze traveled the length of her body, an appreciative murmur escaping his lips as he took in the sight of her. "You look incredible," he said, his voice a low rumble that matched the bubbling water. The uncharacteristic hesitation in his tone sent a shiver down Janet's spine, the compliment stirring something deep within her. "Thank you," she replied, her own voice barely above a whisper as she stepped into the jacuzzi, the warm water enveloping her body like a caress. She settled herself across from him, the steam swirling around them in lazy curls, adding an air of mystery to the intimate setting. Their conversation began with light banter, a verbal dance that belied the undercurrent of desire flowing between them. Tyler sat with his arms resting on the edge of the jacuzzi, his fingers occasionally tapping out a rhythm that seemed to echo the beat of Janet's heart. "So, how does it feel to be the most envied guy in the neighborhood?" Janet teased, a playful smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Tyler chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "I don't know about the neighborhood, but definitely the most fortunate." Their eyes locked, a silent exchange of acknowledgement passing between them. Janet felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and excitement, the double entendre lingering in the air like a shared secret. As the evening wore on, their playful teasing grew bolder, the boundaries of their relationship blurring with each exchanged glance and casual touch. Janet found herself leaning back against the jacuzzi's edge, her body partially submerged in the frothy water, her legs floating gently on the surface. Tyler's gaze seemed drawn to the waterline, where the blue fabric of her bikini bottoms peeked above the bubbling surface. "You're playing with fire," he warned, his voice thick with unspoken promises. Janet arched an eyebrow, a slow, seductive smile spreading across her face. "Maybe I like the heat," she countered, her words a dare that hung in the air between them. The atmosphere in the jacuzzi shifted, the playful teasing giving way to a palpable sense of longing. They drifted closer together, the water lapping around them as they navigated the treacherous waters of their mutual attraction. Their lips met in a searing kiss that spoke of pent-up desire and the thrill of the forbidden. It was a kiss that obliterated all pretense, a kiss that acknowledged the inevitable conclusion of their dangerous game. "Do you want this?" Janet whispered between kisses, her hand finding Tyler's beneath the churning water. The question was a formality, a nod to the fleeting remnants of their former boundaries. "More than you can imagine," Tyler murmured in reply, his resistance all but forgotten as he pulled her closer, their bodies aligning in a silent testament to their shared hunger. The jacuzzi, once a place of relaxation and reprieve, had become a crucible of desire, the water a warm, effervescent cocoon that enveloped them in their own private world. Each touch, each caress, each stolen kiss drew them deeper into the vortex of their passion, the consequences of their actions temporarily forgotten in the face of their overwhelming need for one another. As they finally drew apart, breathless and flushed with the heat of their shared desire, Janet knew that the next decision they made would irrevocably alter the course of their relationship. The time had come to either surrender to their desires or to summon what little remained of their self-control and walk away. Their eyes met, a silent conversation passing between them as they contemplated their next move. The night air caressed their damp skin, a cool counterpoint to the warmth that radiated from their bodies. The jacuzzi's gentle hum provided a backdrop to the pounding of their hearts, a rhythm that matched the frenetic pace of their thoughts. In the end, it was the weight of their unspoken desires that made the decision for them. With a shared nod of understanding, they prepared to exit the jacuzzi, their bodies moving in unison as they readied themselves for the next chapter in their complicated saga. As they stepped out of the water, the cool night air wrapped around them, a stark contrast to the heat that had enveloped them just moments before. Their eyes remained locked on one another, the intensity of their connection evident in the tension that thrummed between them. The jacuzzi's warmth was nothing compared to the fire that raged inside Janet as they toweled off and made their way inside. Each step she took resonated with the beat of her own heart, a staccato rhythm that mirrored the tumultuous emotions coursing through her veins. The cool air of the house wrapped around her damp skin, a stark contrast to the heat that emanated from her very core. With a deep breath to steady her nerves, Janet led Tyler through the shadowy corridors of the house, her hand wrapped firmly in his. The familiar surroundings took on a dreamlike quality, the path to her bedroom a surreal journey towards an uncertain destiny. As they crossed the threshold of her room, Janet felt a surge of empowerment that momentarily eclipsed her lingering doubts. This was her domain, a sanctuary where she held the reins of control. With a gentle push, she sent Tyler tumbling onto the bed, the playful act masking the intensity of the moment. Tyler's eyes widened in surprise, a startled laugh escaping his lips as he landed amidst the plush pillows. The sound was infectious, a reminder that amidst the gravity of their situation, there was still room for lightness and laughter. Janet's response was a coy smile as she reached for the hem of her skirt, the fabric soft against her fingertips. With a fluid motion, she straddled him, the skirt falling away to reveal the naked truth of her desire. The air in the room seemed to grow denser, the atmosphere charged with an electricity that threatened to consume them both. The sight of her, poised above him with a fierceness in her gaze, seemed to strip away Tyler's remaining defenses. His hands found her hips, his touch both a question and an affirmation of the connection that sizzled between them. Their lovemaking was a paradox of tenderness and urgency, a dance of bodies that moved in a rhythm as old as time. Janet's hands explored the contours of Tyler's chest, her fingers tracing the lines of muscle and sinew beneath his damp skin. Each sigh, each moan that escaped his lips, was a testament to her own sensual power, a reminder that she was capable of evoking such raw, unfiltered emotion in the young man who had once looked up to her as a mother figure. Tyler's own explorations were no less fervent, his hands charting a course over the hills and valleys of Janet's body. He was both a willing participant and a curious explorer, his actions a mixture of reverence and unbridled desire. The boundary between right and wrong blurred into insignificance as they gave in to their most primal instincts. The world outside faded to a whisper, the mundane concerns of everyday life rendered meaningless in the face of their overwhelming passion. All that mattered was the here and now, the shared space of their intertwined bodies, and the powerful bond that held them captive in its thrall. Their movements grew more frenzied, the urgency of their need driving them ever closer to the precipice. Janet's breath came in short, sharp gasps, each one a prelude to the final that was fast approaching. And then, with a final, shared cry of release, they tumbled over the edge, their bodies shuddering in unison as wave after wave of pleasure washed over them. In the aftermath, they lay entwined, the only sound in the room the ragged cadence of their breathing as it slowly returned to normal. Janet's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, a tumultuous blend of satisfaction, confusion, and a nagging sense of guilt that she knew she would have to confront in the cold light of day. But for now, she allowed herself to bask in the warmth of their connection, to revel in the sensation of Tyler's arms wrapped tightly around her. They were two souls adrift in a sea of uncertainty, their fates irrevocably intertwined by the choices they had made this night. As sleep eventually claimed them, Janet knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and difficult conversations. The reality of their situation would inevitably assert itself, bringing with it a host of consequences that they could no longer ignore. Yet, in the quiet hours before dawn, none of that seemed to matter. For in this moment, Janet felt more alive than she had in years, her senses awakened by the forbidden embrace of the man who had once been her stepson. And though the future remained shrouded in shadow, she was strangely at peace, secure in the knowledge that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. The dawn's early light crept into the room, painting everything in hues of soft gold. Janet watched the play of sunlight on Tyler's sleeping form, her heart pounding in her chest with a mixture of tenderness and trepidation. She was acutely aware of the warmth of his body next to hers, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the gentle rise and fall of his chest. In the quiet of the morning, with the house still nestled in the remnants of sleep, Janet allowed herself to indulge in the simple joy of the moment. She reveled in the intimacy of their shared space, the quiet breathing, and the subtle shifts of their bodies as they lay entwined on the tousled sheets. Her leg, thrown casually over his, felt both possessive and protective, a tangible connection that spoke of the night's transgressions and the bond that had been forged in the fire of their passion. As Tyler began to stir, Janet's heart fluttered with a combination of excitement and nervousness. She greeted the morning with a playful kick to his leg, her voice a teasing lilt as she whispered, "Rise and shine, sleepyhead." Tyler groaned in mock protest, his eyes fluttering open to reveal the sleepy confusion of a man who had yet to fully grasp the events of the previous night. His gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, the world stood still, their shared secret hanging in the air between them. But then, as if by unspoken agreement, they chose to bask in the lightness of the morning, pushing aside the gravity of their situation for a few precious moments. Janet's laughter filled the room, a melodic sound that seemed to chase away the shadows of doubt and uncertainty. They spoke of trivial things, their conversation a delicate dance around the elephant in the room. Janet teased Tyler about his bedhead, her fingers playfully ruffling his hair as she joked about the benefits of a morning routine. He, in turn, marveled at the ease with which she navigated the morning after, her confident demeanor a stark contrast to his own disheveled state. "You're surprisingly chipper for someone who's usually nursing a coffee at this hour," Tyler observed, his voice tinged with amusement as he propped himself up on his elbow, his gaze never leaving her face. Janet's eyes sparkled with mischief as she replied, "Well, I discovered a new source of energy last night." She punctuated the statement with a gentle nudge to his side, her laughter infectious as she watched him blush. Their playful banter continued, each word, each touch, a delicate thread in the tapestry of their evolving relationship. They lingered in bed, the world outside temporarily forgotten as they navigated the uncharted waters of their newfound intimacy. Eventually, the demands of the day intruded upon their secluded sanctuary. The shrill ring of a phone in the distance served as a reminder that reality was not so easily escaped. With a shared look of resignation, they extricated themselves from the tangled sheets and faced the day, their actions careful and measured, as if any sudden movements might shatter the fragile peace they had managed to create. As they prepared to leave the sanctuary of the bedroom, Janet couldn't help but feel a sense of impending change. The dynamic between her and Tyler had shifted irreversibly, and while the future remained uncertain, she knew that they could no longer go back to the way things were before. They dressed in silence, the air charged with a potent mix of anticipation and apprehension. Janet watched Tyler from the corner of her eye, noting the subtle changes in his demeanor, the slight furrow of his brow, the way his fingers fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, the fleeting glances he cast in her direction. It was clear that they were both acutely aware of the significance of the morning, the weight of their shared secret, a silent presence that accompanied them as they descended the stairs and rejoined the world outside the bedroom door. The house, once a battleground for their silent power struggles, now felt like a shared space, a testament to the connection that had been forged in the heat of their passion. They moved through the familiar rooms with a newfound sense of camaraderie, their actions imbued with a tenderness and understanding that had been conspicuously absent in the days leading up to their indiscretion. As they settled into a routine that was both familiar and irrevocably altered, Janet couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them. The path ahead was shrouded in shadows, a labyrinth of potential pitfalls and untold complications. Yet, as she watched Tyler move about the kitchen, his movements fluid and graceful despite the tension that lingered in the air, Janet felt a surge of hope. They had crossed a line, true, but in doing so, they had also opened the door to a level of honesty and emotional intimacy that she had never expected to find with her stepson. The day ahead promised to be a complex tapestry of emotions and unspoken thoughts, a delicate balance of pretense and genuine connection. But for now, as they sat across from each other at the breakfast table, sharing a quiet meal and stolen glances, Janet allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they could navigate the trials that lay ahead and emerge stronger on the other side. As the evening shadows lengthened and the last rays of the setting sun cast a warm, amber glow over the kitchen, Janet and Tyler found themselves drawn together by the invisible threads of a desire that had been building steadily since the previous night. Dinner had been a leisurely affair, filled with laughter and easy conversation, but as the meal drew to a close, The atmosphere in the room began to shift, charged with a heady mixture of anticipation and unspoken desire. Janet, ever the instigator, allowed her foot to stray beneath the table, her toes lightly grazing Tyler's leg. The contact was innocent enough, but the spark it ignited was anything but. She watched, a thrill of satisfaction coursing through her as Tyler's eyes darkened with need. His fork paused halfway to his mouth as he registered the meaning behind her playful touch. Encouraged by his reaction, Janet let her foot travel higher, tracing teasing patterns along the inside of his thigh. The fabric of his pants provided a frustrating barrier to the heat of his skin, but the effect her touch had on him was undeniable. His breath hitched, his body tensing ever so slightly as he fought to maintain his composure in the face of her bold overture. Tyler's hand reached for hers beneath the table, his fingers entwining with hers in a silent plea for more. The connection between them was electric, a circuit of desire that was completed with the barest brush of their skin. Janet's laughter, a sultry sound that seemed to fill the room with its warmth, was a stark contrast to the tension that now thrummed through the air between them. With a graceful motion, Janet rose from her chair, her grip on Tyler's hand a silent invitation for him to follow. She led him across the kitchen to the counter, her hips swaying with a deliberate sensuality that left little doubt as to her intentions. As she hopped onto the cool granite surface, she cast a coy glance over her shoulder, her eyes locking with his in a wordless promise of the pleasure that awaited them both. Tyler approached her with a sense of purpose, his steps measured and deliberate as he closed the distance between them. The sight of her perched on the counter, her legs parted in silent welcome, was an image he knew would be seared into his memory for years to come. Their lips met in a kiss that was both a homecoming and an exploration, a tender rediscovery of the passion that had blossomed between them. Janet's hands slid beneath the hem of Tyler's shirt, her fingers exploring the contours of his chest and abdomen with a reverence that spoke of her deep-seated need for him. In response, Tyler's hands roamed over the curves of her body, his touch both a question and an answer as they traced the lines of her figure. He could feel the heat of her through the thin fabric of her blouse, a warmth that beckoned him ever closer, urging him to delve deeper into the depths of their shared desire. As their kisses grew more fervent, the need for air became a secondary concern to the need for closer contact. Janet's blouse was the first to go, discarded with a careless flick of Tyler's wrist, revealing the delicate lace of her bra and the tantalizing swell of her breasts. His lips trailed a path of fire along the column of her neck, over the smooth expanse of her chest, and finally, to the hardened peaks that strained against the confines of her lingerie. The sound of Janet's breath catching in her throat was a siren call to Tyler's senses, driving him to explore further, to push the boundaries of their passion to their very limits. His hands slipped beneath the fabric of her skirt, pushing it up around her waist as he sought the heat that awaited him beneath. The cool air of the kitchen was a stark contrast to the heat that radiated from their joined forms, a testament to the intensity of the fire that burned within them both. Their movements were a dance as old as time, a rhythm that was as natural as it was intoxicating. Each thrust, each gasp, each whispered endearment drew them further into the vortex of their shared passion, a maelstrom of sensation that threatened to overwhelm them both. And then, in a moment of exquisite clarity, they reached the pinnacle of their desire, their bodies shuddering in unison as they tumbled over the edge into the abyss of their shared release. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, the only sounds in the room the erratic cadence of their breathing and the soft, satisfied murmurs that escaped their lips as they clung to one another in the aftermath of their lovemaking. The kitchen, once a place of simple domesticity, had been transformed into a sanctuary of passion, a space where the boundaries of their relationship had been irrevocably blurred, giving rise to a connection that transcended the conventional norms of society. As they lay entwined on the counter, their bodies slick with the sweat of their exertions, Janet and Tyler were acutely aware of the monumental shift that had taken place within the walls of the kitchen. The choices they had made, the lines they had crossed, had led them to this moment of undeniable intimacy, a moment that had forever altered the trajectory of their lives. In the quiet stillness that followed, they found a sense of peace and contentment that neither of them had dared to hope for. They had ventured into uncharted territory, driven by a force that was beyond their control, and had emerged stronger, more connected, and infinitely more attuned to the complexities of the human heart. The road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges and potential complications, but for now, as they basked in the warm afterglow of their lovemaking, the world outside the kitchen held no sway over the private kingdom they had created within the walls of their shared home. Together, they would face whatever trials lay ahead, their bond tested and ultimately strengthened by the trials and tribulations that were sure to come. For in each other's arms, they had discovered a love that was both profound and life-affirming, a love that had the power to transcend the boundaries of their past and light the way towards a shared future filled with promise and hope.